Well, at midnight, the federal government shut down, or at least that's what they say. And we have a man who was intimately involved in a previous activity between Congress and the president, former Speaker of the House and Republican presidential candidate Newt Gingrich. He's joining us now from Washington. Mr. Speaker, Newt, good friend, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be with you, and this is a very interesting, very different time. We have just launched Crossfire on CNN, and an amazing number of our shows now are on this whole question of the shutdown and Obamacare and what does it mean. And of course, I guess I come at it from a slightly different angle than most people, because I actually was there in 95, 96 negotiating with President Bill Clinton, so I have probably a slightly different perspective than a lot of people.
You know, you and Clinton were locked in negotiations. He was intimately involved. It looks like the president this time has had hands off. He doesn't meet with either party, doesn't bring the people together, doesn't have any activity except to say, I'm not going to talk, and then he demonizes the opposition. What's the difference?
Well, it's an enormous difference. You know, we've had 17 shutdowns over recent history just as part of the legislative presidential negotiating process. Speaker Tip O'Neill actually had 12 shutdowns during his speakership. I had 2 during my speakership. So it's not like this has never been done. But this particular president, President Obama, is the most aloof, I think the most cynical, and the most distant of any president in my lifetime. He speaks with Putin, the head of Russia, but he doesn't speak to the American Speaker of the House. He talks to the Iranian president, but he doesn't talk with the American Speaker of the House. He meets with the Israeli Prime Minister, but he doesn't meet with the American Speaker of the House. I think it's a very strange pattern of trying to somehow pretend that he is above the Constitution, that he is a president who doesn't need the Congress. And of course, that's the exact opposite of how the Founding Fathers designed the United States government.
Talk about that. You were Speaker of the House. Talk about what the Constitution has to say about the powers of the People's House, the House of Representatives.
Well, this all goes back, it'll be 800 years in 2015. This all goes back to the barons and King John signing the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, in 1215, where the barons said, we're not going to give you money unless you agree to be under the law. And all of our rights in many ways come out of that experience and how it evolved in English history in the following 600 or 700 years. And that's what the Founding Fathers were looking back to when they wrote our Constitution. The People's House, the House of Representatives, which has 435 people elected by population around the country. The People's House has to originate all money bills. If the People's House does not send the money to the president, he can't spend it. And this is the core thing which protects us from dictatorship and which forces presidents to recognize the elected representatives of the American people. So it's at the absolute heart of how the constitutional system works. Every once in a while you get into a struggle so difficult or an issue so contentious that you can't reach an agreement. When that happens, the government stops for a little while. As I said, this has happened 17 times before this. We've always survived it. In fact, sometimes people are shocked at how many parts of the government we don't know that we need and don't even notice when they're down. So I think that we ought to be more realistic about this. The big problem is that President Obama refuses to behave like an American president. He refuses to deal with the Congress as his equal, which it is in the Constitution. Remember, Article 1 of the Constitution is the legislative branch, the House and the Senate. Article 2 is the executive, and Article 3 are the judges. So the Founding Fathers deliberately put the legislature first, and this president puts himself above the Constitution, and that's very dangerous for our freedoms.
What about, you talk about the People's House, what about Harry Reid? I mean, he acts like the Senate is supposed to control things and the House should be a lapdog of the Senate. That's not the way it's supposed to work, is it?
Well, first of all, he thinks the Senate should be the lapdog of Harry Reid. I have never seen a Senate majority leader as abrasive, as arrogant, and candidly, as dishonest about the process. I mean, he knows, for example, that if he allowed the tax on medical devices, which is a tax on our health care, a tax on jobs, and a tax on innovation, if he allowed that tax to come up for repeal, it would pass the Senate by a huge margin. He knows that if he allowed the Keystone Pipeline to come up, it would pass by a huge margin. So he's using his power to block popular issues from reaching the floor of the Senate, where he knows that a number of Democrats would join the Republicans and help do it. You have people like Senator Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia, who has said openly he thinks Obamacare is a disaster. Harry Reid can't give him an open, fair vote, or in fact, that would be part of eroding the whole Obamacare issue before it ever gets off the ground. So Reid is serving as sort of he is the anvil and the president's the hammer, and their goal is to catch the Republicans between the two of them. You can't run the United States with that kind of an attitude, and Reid is going to have to change his attitude, or this is going to get to be a big mess.
Well, the big mess will come up in this business of raising the debt ceiling. That's coming up in just a few weeks. How's that going to come out?
Well, that's part of why I wrote a op-ed yesterday at CNN.com, in which I said the Republicans have to hang tough. The House Republicans absolutely have to hold out on this, because Obama's got to learn that he has to negotiate. I mean, for the House Republicans to cave after this much effort would be a terrible lesson for the country, to teach this president that he's above the law, that he can make demands, that he doesn't have to negotiate, he's not part of the process. It would also set a stage for Obama and Reid to assume that the Republicans will cave in the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is much more dangerous than the government is something that you negotiate with, because if we actually did breach the debt ceiling and actually did repudiate our debt, the effects would be horrendous. So I think you've got to look at this first fight is very important to set the stage for a negotiation on the debt ceiling. And without that, I think you could have you either have a surrender to Obama and he gets to run America by himself without any restraint, or you have a real crisis on the debt ceiling. One of those two things would come down the road.
When you were in charge of the House and you were negotiating with Bill Clinton, who blinked first? Did you guys cave and then take the blame, or what? I mean, they spun the whole thing that this was a congressional shutdown.
Well, look, there's a new article that came out today from Gallup that reinforces something which Nate Silver of the New York Times wrote 2 or 3 days ago. There is no evidence in polling data that, in fact, the shutdown hurt the Republican Party. None. This is a Washington mythology. The fact is, the first re-elected House Republican majority since 1928 came after the shutdown in 1996. So for the first time in 68 years, we had a majority get re-elected. That's hardly punishment, if you will. But I think it's important to look at how that worked out. The big difference was that Bill Clinton and I were able to compartmentalize what we were doing. So we could attack each other at press conferences in the morning and negotiate in the afternoon. We talked almost every day. We didn't talk every day. I think we took Sundays off. But we talked almost every day during the two shutdowns. And the result was you can, as you know, you learn things over time in conversation. You get to feel the other person's concerns. You tell each other stories. You get some communication that doesn't occur in the first hour. But we met for, I think, 35 days in negotiating, and the result was welfare reform, the first tax cut in 17 years, and the only 4 balanced budgets in a row that we've had in your lifetime. And it was our ability between President Clinton and the House Republicans to work together and sort this out. Even while we were fighting, we were able to talk. I sensed no conversation between President Obama and the congressional Republicans, and I think that is just an enormous mistake and, frankly, a tragedy for the country.
You want to prognosticate? Where is this going to take us?
I don't know that I know enough to prognosticate, as you put it. I believe that it's actually healthy for the country to understand that President Obama has to operate within the law, that he is not above the law. I believe if you look at the erosion of his support and the erosion of his approval, this petulant saying, I will not negotiate, I think is actually ultimately educating the country about this guy's personality. I believe people over time are going to look back and say that this was a very important moment, and that the Republicans slowly, gradually learned a number of things about how to govern when faced with a hostile president. And I think this could, in fact, be a very creative period in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Are you going to try it again?
I don't know. We still have a pretty large debt. Calista has a great new book coming out called Yankee Doodle Dandy for 48-year-olds about the American Revolution with Ellis the Elephant. I have a book coming out in November called Breakout about how America could go back to being the most dynamic country in the world. So we're managing to stay with those plus Crossfire. I'm managing to stay pretty busy without running for president. So I don't know, but I'll talk to you about that. Say in 2015, we'll come back and revisit that.
We'll let you announce right here on this platform. I'll give it to you. Okay.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and a very good friend.